The rain hammered against the windows of Grandmother Rose's old Victorian house as I sat in the mahogany-paneled study, staring at the stack of legal documents spread across her antique desk. The smell of old books and lavender still lingered in the air, making it hard to believe she was really gone. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral, and I was finally forcing myself to go through her papers. "You know you can't keep this place, right?" David's voice cut through my thoughts like a knife. My older brother leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, wearing his typical condescending expression. At 32, he'd always acted like he knew everything, and today was no different. "I'm not planning to live here," I replied, not looking up from the deed I was holding. "But I need to understand what Grandma Rose left me." David walked over and peered at the document over my shoulder. "A downtown Seattle property? Nick, you realize what this is worth, right? You're sitting on a gold mine." I did know. The 3-story brick building on First Avenue had been in our family for over 60 years. Grandma Rose had run a small bookstore on the ground floor until she retired 10 years ago. The upper floors had been converted into apartments that provided steady rental income. According to the property assessment I'd found, it was worth at least $800,000 in today's market. "The problem is the taxes," I said, pulling out another folder. "And the maintenance costs. Look at this." I showed him the repair estimates. "The roof needs work, the plumbing is outdated, and the electrical system is from the 1970s. I'm looking at least $150,000 in immediate repairs." David whistled low. "That's a lot of money for someone working at a coffee shop." The comment stung, but I tried not to let it show. After dropping out of college to take care of Mom during her first cancer treatment, I'd never quite gotten back on track. At 25, I was still trying to figure out my life while David had his MBA and a successful career in finance. "I've been thinking about selling," I admitted. "Mom's medical bills are piling up again, and the doctors want to try this new experimental treatment that insurance won't cover." "How much?" David asked, suddenly very interested. "How much what? How much do you want for the property?" I looked at him suspiciously. "Are you seriously asking to buy Grandma Rose's building? Why not? It's a solid investment, and it would keep it in the family. I could give you $250,000 cash, no realtor fees, no waiting around for financing to go through. You'd have the money for Mom's treatment immediately." Something about his eagerness made me uncomfortable. "David, the property is worth 3 times that amount." He shrugged. "In perfect condition, maybe, but you just showed me $150,000 in repairs, plus you'd have to deal with relocating the current tenants, which could take months. And who knows what other problems you'll find once you start renovating. I'm offering you a clean, fast sale." I set the deed down and really looked at my brother. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his expensive suit immaculate despite the Seattle drizzle. He'd driven up from Portland in his new BMW just to help me sort through things, but now I wondered if he'd had this conversation planned all along. "I need to think about it," I said. "Think fast," he replied. "Mom's next treatment is scheduled for next month, right? And didn't you tell me the insurance company already denied the claim? That's a $75,000 procedure, Nick. Where else are you going to get that kind of money?" He was right, and we both knew it. I'd been lying awake at night for weeks, trying to figure out how to help Mom. The coffee shop where I worked barely covered my rent and groceries. I had no savings, no credit, and no other family members who could help. The property was my only asset. "I'll give you until tomorrow to decide," David said, checking his expensive watch. "I'm driving back to Portland tomorrow evening. We can have the paperwork done by then if you want." After he left, I sat alone in the study until the rain stopped. The late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. I picked up an old photograph of Grandma Rose standing in front of her bookstore, smiling proudly. She'd worked so hard to build something lasting for our family. But what choice did I have? Mom needed that treatment, and I needed the money. Maybe David was right. Maybe a quick sale was better than months of uncertainty. I pulled out my phone and called the treatment center to confirm the cost. $75,000, due before the procedure. Then I called my landlord to ask about breaking my lease early. If I was going to sell the property, I might as well move back home to help take care of Mom. By the time I locked up the house that evening, I'd made my decision. The building had been in our family for 60 years, but sometimes you have to choose between the past and the future. And right now, Mom's future was all that mattered. I just hoped I wasn't making the biggest mistake of my life. I met David at a downtown Seattle law office the next morning, clutching a coffee cup like a lifeline. I'd barely slept, second-guessing my decision all night, but Mom's worried face kept flashing through my mind. The experimental treatment was her best hope, and I couldn't let my attachment to a building stand in the way of that. "You look tired," David said as we sat in the waiting room. He was scrolling through his phone, completely relaxed, while I felt like I might throw up. "I am tired," I replied. "This isn't exactly easy for me. It's just a building, Nick. Grandma Rose would want you to use it to help Mom. Before I could respond, the lawyer called us in. Mr. Peterson was a thin man in his 60s who'd handled some of our family's legal matters over the years. He spread the sale documents across his conference table and began explaining the terms. "This is pretty straightforward," he said. "Ms. Johnson is selling the property at 1247 First Avenue to Mr. Johnson for $250,000. The sale is as is, meaning the buyer accepts all responsibility for any repairs or issues with the property." I signed where he indicated, trying not to think about how Grandma Rose had trusted me with her life's work. David signed with a flourish, then wrote out a cashier's check like it was nothing. "Pleasure doing business with you, sis," he said, shaking my hand formally. "You made the right choice." Walking out of that office with a check for $250,000 should have felt like winning the lottery. Instead, I felt hollow. I deposited the money immediately and called the treatment center to schedule Mom's procedure. At least that part was done. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into preparing for the move back home to Tacoma. I gave notice at the coffee shop, packed up my tiny apartment, and tried to focus on the future instead of dwelling on what I'd given up. Mom was excited to have me back, especially since she'd been feeling more tired lately. But David's behavior started bothering me. He'd always been competitive, but now he seemed almost gleeful about the property purchase. When I saw him at Mom's house the following weekend, he couldn't stop talking about his investment strategy and how he was going to maximize the potential of the building. "I'm thinking of converting the whole thing into luxury condos," he said, cutting into Mom's pot roast like he was discussing the weather. "That area is really gentrifying. I could probably get $400,000 per unit." "What about the current tenants?" I asked. "Mrs. Chen has lived there for 15 years, and the Rodriguez family just had a baby." David shrugged. "They'll find somewhere else. This is business, Nick. You can't let emotions cloud your judgment." Something about his casual dismissal of people's lives made my stomach turn. These weren't just tenants. They were neighbors I'd known since childhood. Mrs. Chen had brought us soup when Grandma Rose was sick. The Rodriguez family had helped me carry groceries when I was visiting. "How quickly are you planning to do this?" I asked. "I'm meeting with a development company next week, Phoenix Group. They specialize in historic building conversions. If everything goes well, I could have the property flipped within 6 months." Mom looked uncomfortable. "David, dear, maybe you should take some time to think about this. That building has been in our family for so long." "Mom, I'm not running a charity," David said, not even looking up from his plate. "I paid good money for that property, and I intend to make a profit." The way he said "I paid good money" made me wince. It was my property, my inheritance, and I'd practically given it away to help our family. But David was talking about it like he'd made some brilliant business move. After dinner, I helped Mom with the dishes while David took calls in the living room. I could hear him on the phone, his voice animated as he discussed renovation plans and profit margins. "Are you okay with this?" Mom asked quietly. "You seem upset." "I'm fine," I lied. "It's just weird hearing him talk about tearing apart Grandma Rose's building." Mom dried a plate slowly, choosing her words carefully. "You know, your grandmother always said that building was special. She used to tell me stories about the original owner, how he'd built it as a love letter to his wife. Rose always felt like she was just a caretaker, keeping it safe for future generations." "Well, the future generation needs money for your medical treatment," I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "I know, sweetheart, and I'm grateful. But I also know this is hard for you." 3 weeks later, David called me with news. "The deal with Phoenix Group is done," he said, practically bouncing with excitement. "They're paying $850,000 for the property. Can you believe it? I'm making a $600,000 profit in less than 2 months." The number hit me like a physical blow. $850,000. More than 3 times what he'd paid me. I'd known the property was worth more than $250,000, but hearing the actual sale price made me realize just how much I'd undervalued it. "That's great for you," I managed to say. "Come on, Nick, don't be like that. You got what you needed for Mom's treatment. This is just good business." Good business would have been paying me a fair price to begin with. David's tone shifted, becoming defensive. "I took a risk. I could have lost money on renovations, or the market could have crashed. You wanted a guaranteed sale, and that's what I gave you. Don't act like I cheated you." But it felt exactly like he'd cheated me. Not legally. The sale was legitimate. But morally, ethically, it felt like my own brother had taken advantage of my desperation to line his own pockets. "I have to go," I said, and hung up before he could respond. I sat in Mom's kitchen, staring at the phone and fighting back tears. The treatment had been successful. Mom was responding well, and her latest scans looked promising. That should have been enough. That should have made everything worthwhile. So why did I feel like I'd been robbed? 2 months had passed since David's triumphant sale to Phoenix Group, and I was finally starting to settle into my new routine. Mom's treatment was going well, and I'd found a job at a local bookstore that reminded me of happier times with Grandma Rose. The pay wasn't great, but it was honest work, and I was slowly rebuilding my life. I was shelving new arrivals on a quiet Tuesday morning when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. "Is this Nicole Johnson?" The voice was professional, serious. "Yes, this is Nick. Who's calling?" "Ms. Johnson, this is Marcus Webb from Phoenix Group Development. I'm calling about the property at 1247 First Avenue that we recently purchased from your brother." My heart skipped. Is everything okay? Is there a problem with the building? Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. We're in the process of conducting our final due diligence before we begin renovations, and we've discovered some irregularities with the property deed. I sat down heavily on a nearby stool. What kind of irregularities? According to our title search, the property transfer from Rose Johnson to David Johnson was never properly recorded. The deed we have on file still shows Rose Johnson as the owner, but our research indicates she passed away several months ago. She did. She was my grandmother. There was a pause. "Ms. Johnson, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did your grandmother leave this property to you in her will?" My mouth went dry. "Yes, she did." "And did you subsequently sell it to your brother David?" Yes, I sold it to him. Do you have documentation of that sale?" I thought about the paperwork from Mr. Peterson's office. "Of course, we went through a lawyer and everything." "Ms. Johnson, I need you to understand something. According to our title company, there's no record of any transfer from Rose Johnson to you, and no record of any transfer from you to David Johnson. Legally speaking, you appear to still be the owner of this property." The words didn't make sense. I stared at the phone, trying to process what he was saying. "That's impossible. I signed papers. David paid me. We went through a lawyer." "Which lawyer?" "Peterson. Harold Peterson. He's handled our family's legal matters for years." Another pause. "Ms. Johnson, we've been trying to contact Harold Peterson for the past week. His office appears to be closed, and his phone number is disconnected." The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the bookshelf to steady myself. "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying that Phoenix Group has paid $850,000 for a property that David Johnson may not have had the legal right to sell. And if our research is correct, you may still be the rightful owner." "But I can't be. I already used the money from the sale. My mother's medical bills." "Ms. Johnson, I understand this is confusing. We're going to need to meet in person to sort this out. Can you come to our office tomorrow morning? And please bring any documentation you have regarding the property transfer." After I hung up, I sat in the bookstore for a long time, staring at nothing. Customers came and went, but I moved through the motions like a robot. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what Marcus Webb had told me. How could I still own the property? I'd signed papers. I'd received payment. David had already sold it to Phoenix Group. None of this made any sense. That evening, I drove to Mom's house and went straight to my old room, where I'd stored the box of documents from Grandma Rose's estate. I pulled out the folder containing the sale paperwork and spread everything across my bed. The deed transfer from Grandma Rose to me, the sale agreement from me to David, the cashier's check. It all looked legitimate to me, but then again, I wasn't a lawyer. I tried calling Mr. Peterson's office, but got a recording saying the number was no longer in service. I tried searching for him online, but couldn't find any current contact information. It was like he'd vanished. My hands were shaking as I called David. "Nick, what's up?" He sounded distracted, probably working late as usual. "David, I just got a call from Phoenix Group. They're saying there's a problem with the property sale." "What kind of problem?" "They're saying the deed was never properly transferred. They're saying I might still own the property." Silence. Then, "That's ridiculous. We went through Peterson. Everything was legal." "David, Peterson's office is closed. His phone is disconnected. Phoenix Group has been trying to reach him for a week. Maybe he retired. Maybe he moved. That doesn't mean anything. It means we might have a problem. A big problem." I could hear David breathing heavily on the other end. "Nick, don't panic. There's probably just some paperwork that got held up. These things happen." "These things happen?" "David, you sold a property for $850,000 that you might not have owned. I owned it. You sold it to me, fair and square. But if the original transfer from Grandma Rose to me wasn't properly recorded, then we'll fix it. We'll find Peterson or we'll find another lawyer. This is just a technical issue." But something in his voice told me he wasn't as confident as he was trying to sound. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I wondered if David had known more than he was letting on. "I'm meeting with Phoenix Group tomorrow," I said. "I'll call you afterwards." "Nick, wait. Don't Don't say anything you'll regret. Let me handle this. Handle what? If I'm still the legal owner, then there's nothing for you to handle. You're not the legal owner. You sold me the property. End of story. We'll see about that. I hung up and stared at the documents spread across my bed. Somewhere in this mess was the truth about what had really happened, and I had a sinking feeling that when I found it, my relationship with my brother would never be the same. The next morning couldn't come fast enough. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Phoenix Group's offices were in a gleaming downtown Seattle high-rise, the kind of place that made me feel underdressed in my thrift store blazer. Marcus Webb turned out to be a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He led me to a conference room where another woman was waiting. "This is Sarah Chen, our legal counsel," he said. "She's been handling the title research on your property." Sarah spread out a thick folder of documents across the polished table. "Ms. Johnson, what I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to process, but I need you to understand the legal situation we're all facing." She pulled out a copy of Grandma Rose's will. "Your grandmother left the property to you, that much is clear. But here's where things get complicated." She placed another document next to it. "This is the deed transfer that should have been filed with King County after your grandmother's death. It was never recorded." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that legally, your grandmother still owned the property at the time of her death. Since the will left it to you, you became the owner, but there's no official record of that transfer." Marcus leaned forward. "Which means when your brother sold the property to us, he was selling something he didn't legally own." I felt like I was going to be sick. "But we went through a lawyer, Harold Peterson. He handled all the paperwork." Sarah's expression grew grim. "Ms. Johnson, we've done extensive research on Harold Peterson. He was disbarred 3 years ago for fraudulent practices. He's been operating without a license, essentially running a scam." The room started spinning. "That's impossible. He handled our family's legal matters for years. He was at my grandmother's funeral." "Con artists are often very good at maintaining long-term relationships with their victims," Sarah said gently. "Peterson has been under investigation by the State Bar Association for years. He's been taking advantage of families going through estate issues, collecting fees for services he's not legally allowed to provide. So the sale to David was never legal. The documents you signed have no legal standing. Your brother paid you for a property you couldn't legally sell because you didn't have clear title to it." I put my head in my hands. "This is a nightmare." Marcus cleared his throat. "Ms. Johnson, from our perspective, we paid $850,000 for a property that we now can't develop because the title is unclear. We're going to need to resolve this before we can move forward." "What does that mean?" "It means we need to establish clear ownership of the property. If you're the rightful owner, then we'll need to work with you directly. If your brother can somehow prove he legitimately purchased it from you, then we'll continue working with him." Sarah pulled out another document. "There's something else you need to know. We've discovered that your brother was in contact with Peterson months before your grandmother died. Phone records show multiple calls between them starting last September." My blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "We're not making any accusations, but the timing is suspicious. It's possible that your brother knew about Peterson's fraudulent practices and used them to his advantage." I thought back to that day in Grandma Rose's study, how eager David had been to buy the property, how he'd had an exact price ready, how he'd pressured me to make a quick decision. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew the sale wouldn't be legal." "We can't prove that yet," Sarah said, "but we're going to need to investigate further." The meeting lasted another hour as they explained the legal process ahead. I would need to hire a real estate attorney, file paperwork to establish clear title, and potentially pursue criminal charges against Peterson. They also mentioned that I might need to consider legal action against David if we could prove he'd acted fraudulently. When I left their office, I felt like I was walking through a fog. Everything I thought I knew about the past few months was a lie. David hadn't made a smart investment. He'd committed fraud. Peterson hadn't helped us with legitimate legal work. He'd been running a scam. And I wasn't a woman who'd made a difficult but necessary financial decision. I was a victim. I drove straight to Mom's house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I found her in the kitchen, making tea, looking healthier than she had in months thanks to her treatment. "Nick, sweetheart, you look terrible. What's wrong?" I sat down at the kitchen table and told her everything. About the Phoenix Group meeting, about Peterson being disbarred, about the possibility that David had known the sale was fraudulent. Mom listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each revelation. "I can't believe this," she said finally. "David wouldn't do something like this. Not to family." "Mom, the evidence is pretty clear. He was talking to Peterson months before Grandma Rose died. He knew exactly what he was doing. But why? Why would he do this to you?" I'd been asking myself the same question. Money, greed, Maybe he thought he could get away with it. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Called Peterson. He's explaining everything. Don't worry, we'll get this sorted out. I showed Mom the message. He's still lying, I said. Peterson's been unreachable for weeks. Sarah Chen told me he's probably fled the state. Mom stood up abruptly and walked to the window. I need to call your brother. Mom, don't. Not yet. I need to talk to a lawyer first, figure out my options. Nick, this is family. We need to work this out together. He's not acting like family. He took advantage of me when I was desperate to help you. He made a $600,000 profit off my desperation. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe he didn't know about Peterson. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that my brother wasn't capable of deliberately cheating me, but the evidence was mounting, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I'm going to find out the truth, I said. And if David knew what he was doing, if he deliberately took advantage of me, then I'm going to make sure he faces the consequences. Mom turned from the window, tears in her eyes. This is going to destroy our family. David destroyed our family the moment he decided to put profit over loyalty. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. 3 months ago, I'd been a struggling coffee shop worker with no real prospects. Now I was potentially the owner of an $850,000 property that I'd unknowingly sold to my brother for $250,000. But more than that, I was a woman who'd been betrayed by the person she'd trusted most. And tomorrow, I was going to start fighting back. The confrontation with David happened 3 days later in Mom's living room. I'd hired a real estate attorney, Lisa Martinez, who'd confirmed everything Phoenix Group had told me. The evidence was overwhelming. David had knowingly worked with a disbarred lawyer to defraud me out of my inheritance. I want to give you one chance to explain yourself, I said, sitting across from him with Lisa beside me. One chance to tell me the truth. David looked older than his 32 years, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked like panic. Nick? I swear I didn't know Peterson was disbarred. I thought he was legitimate. Lisa opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Mr. Johnson, we have phone records showing 17 calls between you and Harold Peterson between September and November of last year. That's before your grandmother died. Why were you calling him? I was asking about estate planning for my own finances. Really? Because we also have email records. She pulled out several printed pages. This is from October 15th, where Peterson explicitly mentions his alternative arrangements for property transfers that avoid unnecessary bureaucracy. He's clearly talking about illegal practices. David's face went white. I didn't understand what he meant. And this one from November 3rd, Lisa continued, where you ask Peterson if he can handle the transfer quietly when the time comes. What did you mean by quietly, Mr. Johnson? I watched my brother's face as the lies crumbled. The David I'd grown up with, the one who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework, was disappearing before my eyes. In his place was a stranger who'd been planning to steal from me for months. You knew, I said quietly. You knew Grandma Rose was going to leave me the property and you couldn't stand it. So you found a way to take it from me. Nick, please, I can explain. Explain what? How you watched me struggle with the decision to sell? How you pressured me when I was desperate to help Mom? How you made me feel stupid for not understanding business? David's composure finally cracked. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I have a mortgage, car payments, credit card debt. I needed that money, so you stole it from your sister. I didn't steal anything. I paid you for the property. You paid me $250,000 for something worth $850,000, using fraudulent paperwork, knowing I had no legal right to sell it because the title was never properly transferred. I stood up, amazed at how calm I felt. That's not business, David, that's theft. Mom, who'd been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. David, how could you do this? To your own sister? Mom, I was going to make it right. Once I sold to Phoenix Group, I was going to give Nick more money. When? I demanded. You've had 2 months to make it right, and instead you've been bragging about your business acumen. Lisa cleared her throat. Mr. Johnson, we're prepared to file both civil and criminal charges against you. Wire fraud, conspiracy, theft by deception. You're looking at serious jail time. But there's another option, I said. You can transfer the $850,000 from Phoenix Group to me. You can publicly apologize for what you've done, and you can never contact me again. David looked desperate. Nick, please, we're family. Family doesn't steal from family. Family doesn't take advantage of desperation. Family doesn't lie and cheat and manipulate. It took 3 more weeks to sort out the legal mess. Phoenix Group was surprisingly understanding once they realized I was the victim, not the perpetrator. They agreed to work with me as the rightful owner, and we restructured their purchase agreement. I sold them the property for $850,000, exactly what they'd paid David. David had no choice but to return the money. His lawyer advised him to cooperate fully to avoid criminal charges. In the end, he lost everything: his investment, his reputation, and his family's trust. The hardest part was Mom. She tried to play peacemaker, begging me to forgive David and work things out. But I couldn't pretend that what he'd done was forgivable. Trust, once broken, doesn't just magically repair itself. "I don't understand why you won't at least try to rebuild your relationship with him," she said one evening as we sat on her porch watching the sunset. "Mom, he didn't make a mistake. He planned this. For months. He watched me struggle with the decision to sell, and he knew the whole time that he was cheating me. But he's your brother. My brother died the day he decided to steal from me. The person who did this is just a stranger who happens to share my DNA." 6 months later, I was living in a small apartment near the bookstore, building a life that was finally my own. The money from the Phoenix Group sale had covered Mom's medical bills with plenty left over. I'd started taking business classes at night, thinking about maybe opening my own bookstore someday. The property on First Avenue was being transformed into luxury condos, just like David had planned. The difference was that now Mrs. Chen and the Rodriguez family had received generous relocation packages, and I'd insisted that Phoenix Group include affordable housing units in their development. I hadn't spoken to David since the legal settlement. He'd moved to California, supposedly for a new job, but I suspected he was just running away from the shame of what he'd done. Mom still talked to him occasionally, but she'd stopped asking me to forgive him. One evening, I was walking past the old property when I saw a familiar figure standing on the sidewalk. David was thinner than I remembered, his expensive clothes replaced by a simple jacket and jeans. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past few months. "Nick," he said when he saw me, "I've been hoping I'd run into you." "What do you want, David?" I wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not the lawyer-scripted stuff from before. I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd learned to recognize. But he just looked tired and defeated. "I was jealous," he said. "Grandma Rose always favored you. You were the one she told stories to, the one she trusted with her bookstore, the one she left her most valuable possession to. I couldn't stand it. So you stole it." I told myself I was being smart, that I was taking advantage of an opportunity. But you're right. I was stealing from you when you were at your most vulnerable. Why are you telling me this now? Because I lost my job. Because my wife left me. Because I'm about to lose my house. He looked at me with something that might have been hope. And because I finally understand what I threw away, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that, and might never be. But maybe the beginning of understanding. "I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen," I said. "I'm not going to act like we can just go back to being siblings. I know, but I don't hate you anymore. I'm too busy building my own life to waste energy on hating you." David nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'm proud of you, Nick, for fighting back, for not letting me get away with it. I'm proud of me, too." We stood there for a moment, two people who'd once been family, now something else entirely. Not enemies, but not friends either. Maybe that was enough. "Take care of yourself, David," I said, and walked away. I didn't look back. I had a future to build, and for the first time in my life, I was building it on my own terms, with my own strength and my own voice. The girl who'd sold her inheritance out of desperation was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth and wouldn't let anyone take it from her again.